Terrific. Well, great. Well, thanks very much, Leslie and Todd, for the incomparable work that you all do. We're going to be talking today about moving many needles for English learners with the great setup that Kareem provided us. I will be introducing, let me see here, let me make sure I do this. Why isn't this advancing? There we go. So here's our agenda. I'm going to introduce the speakers and the session focus. Target time is 7 minutes, but I'm going to try to come under that. Each speaker will present for 6 or 7 minutes, total about 20 minutes. We'll have some follow-up questions among the panelists, and then we're going to try to leave about 10 minutes for audience comments and question and answer. So that's the plan. So our panelists are coming to us from the East Coast. Is Ester Quintero, whom I'm sure many of you know. She's a senior fellow at the Albert Shanker Institute. She works at the state policy level nationally. She and Susan Newman, you might know, lead a project that tracks and analyzes state reading legislation that's been enacted since 2019, brings a very important national perspective on state level reading legislation. Maya Valencia Goodall comes to us from California. She's a Chief Strategy Officer at Core Learning. She works as a professional development provider to educators, focusing on expanding how we think about structured literacy as a bridge that connects the science of reading and multilingual learners. And then we have our own, and I say our own because Lisbeth is an English learner specialist in the Lennox School District. Many of you don't know this. I used to teach in the Lennox School District, so there's kind of like a sentimental connection between us. Lisbeth works supporting teachers through tailored professional development, and she's particularly interested in bridging language comprehension to strengthen English learners' reading achievement and their overall academic success. Now, it's important to point out that we are all Spanish speakers, the 4 of us, and we're all committed to bilingual education that includes far more effective literacy practices than is typical in schools with many English learners, whether they employ bilingual programs or English medium programs. So what do we mean by far more effective literacy practices? I'm going to try to be brief about this, but it's an important framing. Some of it you heard from Kareem already, and none of it should really be news to you. These are practices that are well supported by the best evidence we have. Sometimes they're called structured literacy. These are practices that promote oral language development and build on oral language. These are practices that provide systematic, explicit instruction in foundational literacy skills that connect the sounds of the language to the print that's representing that language. And these are practices that connect that connection to robust oral language. Now, it's important to understand that effective practices are generally effective for all learners. We have a very large literature, nationally, internationally, in all sorts of languages, suggesting that effective practices are generally effective for all. But for English learners, effective practices also must include English oral language instruction and support. So each speaker is now going to address how structured literacy provides a base for all learners, and then address the question, what needles must be moved to address the needs of students who are learning English as they are learning to read and to write it. And with that, I'll turn to Ester Quintero of the Albert Shanker Institute. Ester, will you be able to advance your own slides?
I'm not sure. Do I do it in the Google Doc, or do you want
Yes,
do it
in the Google Doc. Yeah, in the Google Doc. And if you can't, then I'll be happy to.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and
Okay.
do it if you don't mind.
Got it. Sure.
So, and I'm glad, Claude, that you provided a little bit of context to the project that I wanted to start with, reading reform across America. We've been tracking reading legislation, as Claude said, And we've looked at many aspects, and I want to acknowledge, Susan Newman and Kayla Rice, who are working with me on this. Essentially, we wanted to provide a clear and systematic picture of what states are doing, what trends are emerging, and, with the goal of informing just policy discourse, but also future policies around reading. And today we are focusing on English learners. As we said in our first report, they don't receive the attention they should in the legislation. And many other organizations have raised this concern. And at the same time, and going back to the opening remarks Claude made, we must keep in mind that good reading legislation is good for all students, whether or not they're mentioned in the legislation itself. So I want to start sharing a little bit about a new project that is ongoing, and it has to do with English learners. Claude is also involved in this research. So the caveat is that we're still looking at the data. I'm going to be sharing very preliminary results and some ideas as to what that report's going to look like and what we're seeing in the legislation. So you can advance, Claude. Basically, the goal of the project is to provide good language, to develop good language that would support existing legislation and would strengthen legislation that we know is good for all learners, but we need more for English learners. So we identify these strong laws. We look at what's in them. We analyze what language is there about English learners. And then we use the research to also determine what's missing, what could be expanded, and what the gaps are. And so far, what we've seen is that a lot of states, you can keep advancing this. There's a little piece of data that's going to show under strong reading laws. What we found is that most of the states have very passing references to ELs. Only 7 states have more robust provisions about these learners. And I'm going to be showing in the next couple of slides what that looks like. Now, there's going to be a lot of information. This is the one I was looking. Only 13 states have a passing reference to ELs, and I'll show you what that means. And 7 have more substantive language in those bills. You can advance. So again, it's a busy table, but one thing to take away is that, more of these cells should be checkmark. In other words, the states that have promising strong reading laws are still addressing ELs in a very kind of narrow way. We see a lot of language around retention, for example, which typically means that EL status is considered in retention decisions. We see language around assessment, but it may be a short line about accommodations or trying to test to screen ELs with screeners in their native language, if possible. So we see very, very superficial and typically narrow. When it comes to teacher capacity and student support, it's even more so. Now we have this other set of states that I mentioned that have more substantive language. I don't expect you to digest all this table but I wanted to make it available and just kind of highlight, 2 or 3 things about these states, because there is good language happening that we can build on, and that's exactly why we're doing this exercise to see what's there, what's good, and then use the research to improve it. And so in Illinois, for example, we see very good language around defining multilingualism as an asset, emphasizing the importance of oral language development, the connections between home language and English, and it ties licensure requirements to actually developing expertise in teaching ELs. So that's a very important piece. California and Minnesota have some language about assessment, the need for this assessment to be culturally and appropriate, culturally responsive responsive, and also to be administered in the language of the children, if possible. And especially Minnesota has, it's interesting, there's a lot of data transparency around reporting how ELs are doing, and sort of keeping track of that progress, which is not the case in many other states. But at the beginning, I told you, so we're using this language to see what's there to sort of, what has real world validity, but we're also going to the research. And I'm going to give you an example of oral language. This is some tables we have in our report. And the way we're structuring is, what's good for all students, the top part. I'm not going to read each box. And then what's good for EL. So, and English language development is crucial. We know from the research that it should be offered as soon as they start school. They should be ongoing, and it should be done. There's certain features that it must have. Now, when we go to the legislation, continuing with this example of oral language and ELD, we see we don't find this language. We find some laws that have a slight reference. There's a law in California, and the recent one, 1454. The Minnesota bill has like an indirect reference, but we need more robust language around this piece. It's a critical piece. And the other issue that's happening here is that there are laws that are unrelated to reading that regulates ELD instruction. And for example, in Arizona, there's a law that mandates a 4-hour ELD block for newcomers. And so this can, limit access to tier 1 reading instruction. The point being, these things cannot happen sort of in separate parallel tracks, but they need to exist in the same bill. There needs to be coordination. So the takeaways are, we need to include ELs explicitly in the legislation, and this is long overdue. But we don't have to start from scratch. We have legislation that is already strong, and it's a foundation for all learners. And then the goal of this project is really to provide the tools, to provide the language and the analysis to refine and improve what we already have, the legislation that we already have. And so if you're interested in this work, we plan on having this report out early next year, and you can check with me or check our website for updates and any questions you have.
Thank you, Esther. That is amazing insight, especially
Maya,
when it
can I just interrupt you? I just want to make sure people know that this PowerPoint will be available. I was trying to unmute myself and they wouldn't let me because Esther was talking. The PowerPoint will be available, so if you're scribbling wildly, don't worry about it. You'll have the link to it. Sorry. So Maya, right, go. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Claude. Thank you, Esther, for that insight. It's so interesting to hear all of the different ways that people are approaching this. And one of the things that we think about at CORE is disaggregating that information and understanding that for multilingual learners, the conversation around literacy has often been split into two. So structured literacy on one side and bilingual education on the other. But now we have an unprecedented vision in California, and at CORE, we see structured literacy as the bridge, not the divide. Structured literacy doesn't just tell us how to teach reading, it gives us the why, which is a framework for how language itself is developed. When implemented with a second language lens, not yet, Claude, back 2 slides. Yep, back again, thank you. Still on the first slide. Awesome. So when structured literacy is implemented with that second language acquisition lens, it becomes a roadmap for how all students, including English learners, multilingual learners, acquire and use language with precision and meaning. Next slide. Too often, structured literacy is reduced to phonics, to decoding, to something mechanical, but that's not what it is. Structured literacy at its core is a comprehensive framework of language. It teaches us about phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. All of these components are part of both language learning and literacy. They are connected and reciprocal in nature. In other words, structured literacy explains how language develops and why it develops in the way that it does. When people push back against structured literacy, it's usually because they think it ignores oral language or that it doesn't honor bilingualism. But that's a misunderstanding. When done right, structured literacy makes oral language central, not peripheral. It gives us tools to make language visible and teachable. It allows students to see the architecture of language, to understand that words have form, function, and meaning, and that those can transfer across languages. Second language acquisition and applied linguistic research then doesn't compete with structured literacy. In fact, it enhances it. So when we think of structured literacy and multilingual learners, we can bring these two together. We are not choosing between structured literacy and bilingual education. We are integrating them. Next slide. The IDA infographic makes this relationship visible. It illustrates how the components of structured literacy, phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics establish the form, while oral language, orthography, and text structure combined with pragmatics and discourse bring the function to life. Crucially, the IDA infographic also shows us what ELD teachers have known. And in fact, I've already seen it in the chat. Language development requires direct, systematic, and explicit instruction. Students don't absorb linguistic structures by teacher input alone. They learn them through intentional teaching that connects speaking, reading, and writing to the patterns and purposes of language itself. Structured literacy, therefore, is comprehensive language instruction. Next slide. So, if structured literacy gives us the framework for how language develops, then the next question is, next slide, thank you. How do we make sure every teacher understands and can apply it? So that begins with professional learning, the kind that connects language and literacy as one integrated practice. Sustainable literacy improvement, it starts with people, not programs. Districts need professional learning that helps educators see structured literacy as language instruction. When teachers understand how the components of language build upon one another, they can reach every learner, especially multilingual students, with clarity and confidence. No matter where a district begins, early literacy, elementary reading, secondary literacy, success depends on coherent, multi-year planning that grows teacher expertise step by step. And the strongest districts align their systems around a shared language and literacy vision. That means coordinating funding so professional learning, materials, and coaching reinforce one another instead of competing for attention. But alignment isn't enough. The literacy plan itself must endure. It should function as a community contract. Imagine a collective agreement that says, this is what literacy means for our students, our teachers, our families. When leadership changes, as it always does, the plan should remain. It becomes the through line that preserves the coherence and reflects the community's long-term investment in language and literacy. And that's why districts need partners who understand both, who can help design instructional systems that are not only research aligned, but built to last, linguistically, academically, and organizationally. This is how we move the needle. Next slide. Our next endeavor isn't choosing sides. It's building systems that make language and literacy one conversation, sustained by every teacher every year. Over to you, Dr. Lisbeth.
Thank you, Maya. And I love the way that you are addressing language literacy and the sharing and funding of a vision that must work within the district. And that's part of our goal. So, hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Lisbeth Samaniego, English Learner Specialist for the Lennox School District. Today, I'm going to share how we're moving many needles here in Lennox to ground our work in the science of reading, and as well as we are aligning with our 3 district goals, which are student outcomes, conditions of learning, and family engagement. As you can hear, I'm an emerging bilingual, born and raised in Lima, Peru, and I know what it means to learn English while at the same time acquiring advanced academic knowledge and content. Over my 32 years in education, 25 in the classroom, my passion for bilingual literacy and neuroscience research has guided this work to ensure all multilingual learners here in Lennox not only succeed, but also thrive academically. Next. So the urgency is back. Yes. The urgency is clear. We know that nationally only 10% of English learners reach reading proficiency by grade 4. Our reclassification data reflects some progress, which is great. So we started it at 6.9%, went up to 17.5%, and we're maintaining our 16%. And this is a way to build this growth. Our goal is basically, district goal is to align the ELD standards and the Common Core standards. They're not separate, they're together with the science of reading evidence-based practice. And our goal is also to ensure this instruction is provided with fidelity. At the same time, this focus reflects the California EL roadmap, and as a way that our district aims to close those equity gaps, ensuring access and aligned systems for our English learners. Next. So our work here in Lennox is grounded in research. We bring the why in connecting language and literacy. Dr. Claude Goldenberg, he is famous here, has highlighted the dual challenge of learning English while reading complex text, making oral language and literacy integration essential components in instruction. Neuroscientist Dr. Kovelman confirms the cognitive benefits of biliteracy, as well as Dr. Cardenas Hagen also emphasizes that structural literacy systematically builds skills. And finally, this is our roadmap that Scarborough's reading rope reminds us that word recognition and language comprehension must work together to create skilled readers. Based on that, we have applied here in Lennox this research into practice by developing a designated ELD scope and sequence that's K through 5. This scope and sequence is aligned to Common Core and ELD standards, but those are complete with ready-to-use lessons that support systematic instruction across the 4 language domains using our state-adopted materials. How do we do all? It's a work that we've done here at the department, as a department, and it's been working beautifully. We are now in our 2nd year of LERS implementation, providing teachers with the knowledge and tools to reinforce decoding and language comprehension. And the training supports the science of reading while advancing our goal number 2, our district goal to ensure students benefit from high quality instruction. We're also expanding our dual language program into a 90-10 model in partnership with LMU that's supporting biliteracy expansion, providing our teachers with cross-linguistic transfer, professional development, as well as bilingual workshops to parents that they can support the child at home to build that biliteracy. And for our newcomers, we have entry screeners that guide our system of supports, our funding, our Title III, and as well as Lexia English. And now we have Total College tutors that provide that support to support and scaffolds to accelerate that language growth. And in alignment with our goal 3, we are unifying the family engagement through bilingual parent liaisons at all school sites, parent college classes, ESL classes, annual summits, and parent workshops, recognizing that families are essential components in student success. We cannot be left without them. Next. A reclassification, as I mentioned before, a rate grew from 6.9% to 17.5% in 1 year. This growth reflects targeted intervention, as I mentioned, supported by Title III funding, but most importantly, stronger teacher knowledge of the science of reading and ELD alignment, as long as with consistent data-driven practices at all school sites and Tier 2, Tier 3, targeted and scaffolded intervention cycles. And this results directly advance our district commitment to equity and sustained focus on multilingual learner achievement. So how do we move many needles at once here in Lennox? By continue to ground our work in the science of reading research, applying it with fidelity, that is important, sustaining collaboration from instructional services, providing alignment between the Common Core and ELD standards. I need to emphasize that they're not separate, they go together. ELD is not a different component for ELA, they both merge. And also supporting with evidence-based practice and collaborating with all educational partners from district office, our instructional service department, to schools, to teachers, students, and parents, ensuring that every multilingual learner thrives. Next. As I close, I want to highlight that evidence-based literacy isn't just about filling the gaps. Okay, it's about opening doors to biliteracy, to equity, and to lifelong success. Thank you.
Claude, are you able to unmute or no?
There we go.
Valentina, there
Can you hear
go.
me now?
We can hear you
Yeah.
now.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks to the three of you. Very, very well presented. I know we have some questions among the three of us. Who would like to start? Okay, if no one will, I will, but maybe someone else wants to ask a question. I always ask the question, so okay, I'll ask the question. So I'm gonna ask my question first to Esther, because as Esther mentioned, I'm working with her and with Susan Newman on looking at policies, and I'm very interested. You know, we just had 1454. It's been signed by the governor. There's a great deal of enthusiasm about it. And I'm wondering, Esther, based on you've got the most comprehensive knowledge of legislation, particularly as it pertains to ELs around the country, of anyone that I know. So based on your knowledge of this, what would you say are the relative strengths and, you know, maybe some weaknesses or things that could be shorn up about 1454?
Yes, thank you for that question. So it's true that we have sort of this broad perspective which can be a strength, but also, a limitation in the sense that we don't know the contexts in which these bills happen to, be drafted and signed into law. I happen to know a little bit more about the California context just because it has been, so publicized and it's taken a while. So it helps me put this in the kind of coding and analysis that we do, which tends to be very dispassionate. It puts it into context. So my answer is going to be based on both sort of this dispassionate coding that we do with all these bills, and we've coded for over 400 of them. And then knowing the California situation a little bit more, how does that make sense altogether? So if I'm putting my lens of, okay, how does this bill compare with others? There are bills that are very detailed, very they just are extremely comprehensive out there, and they're in a way kind of like a work of art. Sometimes a little too tight. They feel a little bit like straitjackets, but there's really great examples out there of legislation that is very comprehensive, makes a lot of sense. The California piece is a little bit more general. It's a lighter type of bill. It's a bill that focuses more on sort of essential pieces. And one very good thing about it is that, and that we've seen in very few pieces of legislation, is that it really brings together many aspects that matter in reading, not just the 5 pillars, but this bill talks about oral language, it talks about background knowledge, it talks about writing. It's very rarely that we see all those mentioned in the same piece of legislation. I think I wrote a little commentary about it, and I think it was a handful of bills, in about 18 bills in 8 or 9 states that are really that comprehensive. So that I would highlight as a strength of the legislation, and kind of like the sort of the challenge will be, because the California legislation is a bit more general, and more will have to be figured out after the passage of the bill. And so that that sort of puts the onus on implementation, which is the case in any case with any bill, but perhaps a little bit more in California, monitoring and tracking and course correcting and those things. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks. That's such an interesting analysis, and I particularly appreciate it because again, as I said, I don't know anyone who's got the broad perspective you have. So I think that's very informative. Lisbeth, Maya, you want to ask a question of someone?
Yes. Maya, in Lennox, we have a very large population of English learners, and we've learned that ELD can't just live in the designated block. It has to be intentionally integrated throughout the day. So based on your experience, what are your thoughts on how to bridge the gaps between teaching structural literacy in ELA and teaching ELD?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I think you expressed a really great way that you're doing it. I think it really comes down to implementation. It's structured literacy and ELD are not separate things. However, on campuses, they've been positioned as parallel work, like rather than collaborative work. So it's really about that professional development. That helps the ELA teachers see themselves as language teachers, and helps the ELD teachers see how the structure of English, or their time spent teaching language comprehension, has a positive impact on what the reading teacher is doing. It's really about helping the communication between the two sets of teachers, and really understanding how structured literacy is the foundation and the base. And from there, we understand the oral language work that we're doing, and how the oral language is a through line through to comprehension. So the more that we understand orally and comprehend the language, then when we're manipulating, playing with the language in phonemic awareness and phonics activities, and then attaching it to print, we have all of that schema. So it's really about having the professional development that understands these two tracks and pulls them together. So just to say that that's what we do, our work is based on at core, and bringing and bridging those two things rather than having them carry on as separate conversations.
Mhm.
So back to you. You talked about this yesterday about, having to take some of the work that you're doing and make sure you highlight for the multilingual learners and the English learners. So, how do the teachers you work with respond to those trainings, emphasizing those structured literacy approaches? And do you get any pushback and if so, what is the pushback based on?
That's a very important question. Yes, the pushback is real, right? And we see that because teachers are balancing so many things at once. However, teachers have responded positively in Lennox. There's a sense of buy-in, which is so exciting, especially because our team brings both research and 20 plus years of experience in the classroom, having used those practices in the classroom ourselves. Most importantly, our RTI specialist, our assessment specialists and curriculum specialists, which are here in the audience, they're my heroes. We work together to anchor our trainings and practical strategies that teachers and lessons that we develop that teachers can apply the very next day. That is huge, showing how the science of reading is connecting directly to our state adopted curriculum. This makes the work manageable instead of we need to do one more thing. And I would say the hesitation comes when it's about balancing time. So when do I provide designated ELD? When do I provide core instruction and interventions? What about tier 2, tier 3 pools? And we address those by modeling how structural literacy routines integrate into their existing blocks. And how are those going to benefit all students, not just English learners? So over time, we're showing them data that helped ease those concerns, but we're trying to maintain that buy-in.
Great. Well, that's so interesting and we can dig in a little bit. I think fortunately we have quite a bit of time, Leslie, another what, 10, we have 10, 15 minutes maybe, is that correct?
Yeah, you have about 12 minutes.
12 minutes, that's perfect. So we want to open it up to audience comments, questions and answers. There've been some comment. Leslie, are people able to unmute or so they put everything in the chat?
They are not, I think, in this particular format. So,
Okay.
but they can put a question in the chat and we
That's right.
can.
You're gonna have to use your written language skills,
Right.
different from oral language, as we know, related but different. So use your written language skills to put stuff in the chat. I see several already. And let me just start with, here's one from Becky Sullivan. Dr. Samaniego, how is your district using LCRS funding? Good question.
That's a great question. In the funding, and I don't quite deal directly with funding, but we do allocate our Title III fundings, and we have a grant now in place that we are using that to provide the professional development to teachers, to interventionists, and as well as to fund letters.
So you are using those funds
Yes,
for that.
and Title III, heavily in Title III as well.
To advance the agenda. So you're using it to advance the agenda you have in the
Yes.
district. A lot of times funding comes in and can derail things because, oh, we got this pot of money, let's do this instead. But you're using it to coherently move ahead a very coherent agenda. Is that correct?
Yes. And the grant money also is allowing us to add those components that they are needed to provide the professional development. Like I said, to have our teachers be part of letters in this case, or attend structural literacy symposiums and all that.
Right. But whatever your agenda is, right? You're not letting it derail you, but you're
No,
pushing it forward.
no,
Great, perfect.
no.
There's a question, let's address this because we tend to focus a lot on elementary. But Jamie asks, what if we're talking about older learner, 8th, 9th grade? How do we help middle school educators teach the English language learners? Maya, you want to take a crack at that?
Yes, and Claude, there was another, I think, question that kind of goes with it, and it was asking like, are you asking, let's say, a science or social studies teacher to also understand structured literacy? And I think those kind of go together. And the
Yes.
answer is yes. I mean, if you have a student in your class that doesn't know how to read or hasn't been able to crack the code, then yes, it is really important for all teachers to consider themselves both language teachers and literacy teachers. And I separated them, but as we talked in the, talk, really they're together. So there are ways to do that. Number one is to provide more experience with oral language, and that is having the students actually produce the language, express. There's lots of neuroscience and cognitive science that suggests and understands the connection between creating spoken language and how you will then attach that to print, either the print that you read or the print that you create through expressive writing. So, understanding those components at any grade level or age, what a good professional development will do, it will honor the student's age in terms of how to present the material. So while, like, let's say if you're thinking about learning another language, one that you don't currently speak, and the first things you're going to do is learn how to say your name, learn how to say some basic communication skills. It doesn't matter how old you are. If you're 9 years old or you're 90 years old, there's a trajectory. However, the presentation or the implementation will be different and should honor your age. And so what we want to do with the adolescent students is we want to honor who they are in that moment. They're teenagers. We don't want to give them baby books or anything that looks like too young for them. Even if we are going all the way back to the phoneme level, we're going to honor who they are. So it's really about understanding structured literacy, how to teach reading, how to teach language, and presenting it for the student and where they are at that moment.
So the same basic idea as you're saying, but adapted to the developmental and the language and the literacy level of the students.
Exactly.
Is
Yes.
that
Yeah. It
accurate?
doesn't change. Yeah.
All right, got it. Okay, Barbara Conboy, I appreciate your persistence, and so we're going to get into a little controversy here. I'm going to just read it. Where are CABE and Californians together on this topic now? I see that CalTOG has supported the recent legislation, but CABE has a lot of influence on IHE faculty as well as district personnel and has really pushed back against SOR initiatives, mostly using straw man arguments. Anyone want to take that?
Well, I mean, the question is, where is Kaveh now? We can't speak. I can't speak for Kaveh because I don't know. Like, I can't say where they are now. But where we are now, we can talk about. And what we're talking about is that you just don't have to choose between things. The point is that you can have it all. You can have structured literacy and bilingual education. You can honor the students. You can honor their multilingual background. You can help maintain their heritage language, and you can teach them how to read. And we have the research, we have the science, we know how to do all of it together. And we are here to promote the multilingualism, the multilingual learner, and making sure that students and teachers know that. A couple of other things to say about that. One is, it is completely possible to learn how to read, write, and speak in two languages at the same time. This is really important for all of us as educators and researchers to understand and know. So we don't have to choose between them. Structured literacy gives us a very clear roadmap on how to teach language and literacy, and it goes across languages. It's not just for English. It is how language works in general. And what you started this conversation, Claude, with what generally works for multilingual learners generally works for everyone else. And then we also understand that learning English is not an intervention activity. Learning English is an opportunity to become bilingual. And if we keep that at the front and foremost of what we're thinking, then we understand we choose all the children in our state for what they know, what they bring cognitively, their background, their heritage language, and what they're doing at school, and we can support them. And we know how to do this.
Thanks, Maya. Very informative and very politic, I must say. Thank you so much. Kate has been very patient. I figured out how to unmute her. So Kate, you're on.
Thank you so much. My name's Kate O'Mara, and I'm a graduate student working on California rural school literacy, which, if you're not familiar, there's over 300 schools in California that are rural, and a number of them have ELD students. So this is a subject that I'm somewhat familiar. I would like to ask a couple of things. First, if we could have the link to your website, and if you're open to contact from me specifically, because I'm looking for participants and I'm looking to partner in my research right now. And the second thing is to just bring awareness that a third of our schools across the country are rural, and that they are part of the group that's not really in focus when it comes to funding. And I was wanting to know if your research has included rural schools or if you're predominantly in urban and suburban schools.
Is that to Maya, Kate? Kate, hello. Darn, do I have to unmute you again? Ask to unmute. Sorry about that. Go.
Sorry, I'm really quick on the mute me myself button. Yeah, so either for Esther or for Maya, because they both spoke to the research that they're doing, that we have commonality in our research.
And
Thank
by
you.
contact information, you're referring specifically to Esther and Maya, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because I believe Lennox School District is within the city limits, like Hawthorne or somewhere like that. So it really, while we have commonality, it wouldn't really fit
Right.
my
So you're speaking
particular
from a
focus.
rural perspective.
Yes, yes. Just because
Okay.
there's so many students that are overlooked, and people don't really think about the rural schools, even though
Right.
it can be up to a third of the students within particular states. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Esther or
I
Maya,
just
you
put,
want to?
yeah, I just put my email address in the chat. If you scroll back to my slide, my last slide, it has my email address on there as well. And yes, I mean, we at CORE, we partner with every school district. What we do is we come in, we learn about your data, we learn about what you're doing. We then provide a plan specific to your goals and specific to how you want to begin. There's multiple on-ramps with this kind of work. So depending on where you want to start, do you want to start with teacher training? Do you want to start with your principals training? Do you want to start with on-site implementation and coaching? And all of our coaching is structured literacy and language based. So we already combine the multilingual learner, the English language variety speaker, and any students who may have dyslexia. We put that into our training so all teachers will know how to serve all the students. And then we provide the admin training and the district training, however it is that you want to engage. And we do that in small districts, medium-sized districts, and large districts. So we are here for you in California and across the nation.
Thanks, Maya. Kate, Esther put her email contact in the chat. Esther, is any comment that you'd like to offer?
No, I think it's a very interesting question, and I don't recall. We're not tracking this particular, we're tracking many things in these bills, 60, 70 things. And rural students or any reference to rural schools is not something that we've included before, but it's very, it's something potentially that we can look into. And would love to be connected. And if you have ideas as to, how to do that, what's important, and, how our research can support that, I'd be happy to follow up.
That is an interesting parameter that we hadn't discussed. I mean, interestingly or not, it would also track with some of the political things going on, which, tend to swamp everything else. But rurality and political inclinations are closely aligned, certainly at the state level, but it would be something that could be coded, probably some degrees of % rurality or something like that.
Yeah,
It's an interesting idea.
very interesting.
Hey, Claude,
Let's see.
we need to wrap up.
Yes,
The other
yes,
group's coming
yes,
back.
we're at time. So I'm going to show our very last slide, which is this one. We appreciate your participation, your great questions. You will get a link to this file. And thanks so much to Lisbeth, to Esther, to Maya for participating, and of course to Leslie, and of course to the ultimate Todd Collins, who's put this thing together. And if you haven't thought about it, he needs the reading. What do you call the award you're going to give? I hope it's to him.
Oh,
I don't
the
know.
Reading Hero Award. He won't let us
Who-
give it to him. I know.
You must insist, Leslie. You know how to insist. I know you do. Anyway,
I
thanks
already
to
have something in
everyone.
the works. Don't worry about it.
Thanks to everyone.